Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all here. As we were just saying, on a Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock, You actually remembered to come. Yay. I'm Joan Gand from the Palm Springs Modern Committee, and that's PS ModCom for short. I'm the chair of the Education Committee, and that's why we are here to educate you. And we want to thank you for coming. This is the first lecture in our free lecture series this year. We'll be having 6 lectures, and this is the 3rd year we've done this, and so we hope, is anyone here for the first time at our lecture series? Well, welcome. Good to see you, and good to see so many people who have returned. This year, we have some wonderful sponsors that I want to mention, the Anderson Children's Foundation and Eisenhower Health. So thank you to them for helping to make this happen. And we're going to have some more wonderful lectures coming up. I'm just going to read them off really quickly. On December 2nd at UCR Palm Desert, it's called From the Studebaker Avanti to Space Age Style. And that's going to be a fantastic lecture at 7 p.m. Actually, sorry, I think it's 6 p.m. 6 o'clock p.m. to 7 p.m. on December 2nd. And then on January 16th, back here at the Rancho Mirage Library, Chicago to the Desert, Mid-Century Connections, and I will be one of the speakers for that one. Ask me what we're talking about. I'm not sure yet. We're going to find out. Then February 3rd, back at UCR Palm Desert, Deborah and Richard Hovel will be talking about modernist makers, and they're going to be talking about ceramics and concrete work. It should be great, talking about Stan Bitters and Volkas and Nivola and other makers of that era. Then on March 5th, back here at the library, Sydney Williams will be here speaking on her father-in-law, E. Stewart Williams, the wonderful architect. And then April 7th, back at UCR, the Maslin House film will be shown, and the director, Scott Goldstein, will be speaking, and our own Greg Braun from our Education Committee will also be speaking. So we've got a great schedule coming up of all kinds of varied and interesting things in the idea of Modernism 101. Things we need to learn, things we need to know, things we forgot and need to be reminded about. So I'm going to introduce now Sian Winship, who holds a Master's of Heritage Preservation degree from the University of Southern California, and she is president of the Society of Architectural Historians and a contributing essayist to the wonderful new Palm Springs School book, which you should definitely check out. All right, here is Sian.
Well, thanks, Joan, and thanks to Palm Springs ModCom and to the library. And in absentia, I have to thank also Alan Hess, who's probably on his way to Tucson right now for Tucson Modernism Week. Who knew they had one? I guess everything that starts here eventually gets to the other places in the West, right? But it was Alan who asked me a couple of years ago to contribute an essay to the Palm Springs School book, which is fantastic. If you don't have a copy, you should treat yourself to one. And so when he asked me, he had a specific ask for me. He said he wanted me to write about the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians and their impact on the architecture of Palm Springs. And I said, sure, Alan. And I had no idea what I was going to write about. This is not really an area of expertise for me. I guess the most experience I'd had was I had been writing about the tribe and the unfair treatment by the U.S. government. We'll talk a little bit about that later on, but for the Palm Springs Historic Context Statement, which was a project of the city of Palm Springs a few years prior. So that, I guess, qualified me. In my own mind, I physically started sweating, which Alan couldn't see, because the only thing I have ever received a C in was Indians in the 3rd grade. And so I guess basically what I did was I set out to right that wrong. And so I'm here to tell you a little bit about what I found, which I believe was truly remarkable. I had no idea, like I said, what that research would yield. But what I found was actually, I'll get this. There we go. I'll get this down. Was that there's this amazing story we'll talk about today about an all-woman tribal council transformed the built environment in Palm Springs. It paved the way as land rich and cash poor. And she used a single powerful phrase, which I'll never forget: you can't eat dirt. And so this is a story of amazing resilience and impact, far beyond what they have received credit for. But I'm going to take a step back for just a moment and pause and be a total research geek. Okay, so I said I walked into this project. I didn't know about anything that I was going to find. I just started scouring various archives and such, and I found a key document that revealed really the important role that the tribe had played in the development of the city and exactly how that came to be. And since you found your way to the library, I'm assuming that you guys like books. And you may be aware of a book that was written by Robert Caro on Moses, the developer of New York City. He also wrote like 15 books on LBJ. But anyway, he's an amazing researcher, an amazing writer, Pulitzer Prize winner. And he has a very famous phrase, and it's called "turn every page." And what that means is, don't assume, literally turn over every document and see what you find. He sort of coined that because he ended up finding something really important about LBJ that was documented nowhere else but like on the back of an envelope. And my research journey took me to USC Special Collections, and there I discovered this list, in 3 basically uncatalogued boxes. So I requested this collection. They brought me 3 boxes of stuff that nobody had gone through in 50 years. It wasn't organized. It wasn't in folders. And I literally turned every page. And when I got to this page, I audibly gasped, because what it revealed was this is all the long-term leases, their dates, the terms, the tribal members that were involved, and the lessors. And what I learned was that between 1961 and 1963, there were 40 leases negotiated with the tribe. And by 1967, 53 leases were in place for approximately 1,300 acres of land. And basically, as we'll look at it today, all of the things that were built there were built by members of the Palm Springs School in amazingly avant-garde mid-century modern style. But in order to understand why I audibly gasped and understand the impact of this document, we're going to have to go back and sort of talk about the leasing origin story for just a minute. So I'm guessing that probably most of you have seen this, but this is sort of the infamous checkerboard for Palm Springs. In 1852, the U.S. government imposed a grid upon the desert landscape, because it's a natural thing to put a grid on a desert landscape. I'm convinced it must have been some bureaucrat in Washington who had never been out here, right? And so he draws this grid, and then during the 1860s, they number each of these odd, even, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera. The government gives the odd-numbered parcels, they're all 1 square mile, each parcel is 1 square mile, to the Southern Pacific Railroad. So they're not contiguous, right? And then in 1876, President Grant designated the non-contiguous even parcels, the squares, as what was then the reservation for the Agua Caliente Indians. So basically, control over the land and the tribe's destiny was caught up in red tape for decades. In 1887, Congress passed the General Allotment Act, and what that did was it took each of those 1 square mile parcels and divided it up between members of the tribe. And so you ended up with situations where, like, there might be a half acre that was owned by 1 member of the tribe, an acre over here that was owned by 3 members of a tribe, and it just basically chopped everything up. The idea behind this is they were trying to encourage them to farm But again, now it means that some of the land is owned by individuals and some of the land is owned collectively by the tribe as a whole. But no matter what, the Bureau of Indian Affairs controlled what the tribe could do and not do, mostly not do, with the land. And specifically, they couldn't sell it. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs also said, well, you could lease it, but you can't lease it for more than 5 years. So what do you do? What do you do with that, right? And this is especially critical for this highlighted parcel here. And so you'll see I'm going to bring the checkerboard back several times through the course of this talk and highlight a different parcel. So we're talking here about Section 14. Section 14 was the most visible and valuable square of the tribal land. As hopefully you can see, it's directly adjacent to downtown Palm Springs. It's like right behind the plaza. And this 5-year lease moratorium, if you will, meant that the tribe couldn't basically lease it to anyone who was going to do anything permanent on the land. And so what happened was the only people who were willing to take that on were the city's Black and Latino service workers who were working in all the resorts, who were cooking in the resorts, who were working construction. And so they built themselves little vernacular structures. So nobody's going to invest in building a big home there or a home there if it's only 5 years and you have to give it back up. And so they built these vernacular structures in Section 14. And it was also because they weren't allowed to live anywhere else in Palm Springs. So here was a place they could be close to their jobs and have at least some control over their own destiny. But after World War II, of course, Palm Springs grew by leaps and bounds, and the locals grew really dissatisfied with the structures that you could, on Section 14, you can see them from downtown. They labeled it a shanty town. And then city officials basically spent years and years in a process of evicting these people. And ultimately, in the late 1960s, while everybody was at work, the city officials set them on fire. So it's a truly awful story. And it's a story with no heroes. And believe me, I've tried to find the heroes in there, and there aren't any. And I would encourage you, if you haven't, to go visit the Agua Caliente Cultural Center downtown. There is an excellent, excellent exhibit on this part of the tribe's history. Okay, but I digress. So despite the fact that, as I mentioned, the 1891 Mission Indian Relief Act authorizes these parcels to individual members of the tribe, nothing happens. Nobody can do anything. It's all just stuck in red tape. So during the 1930s, 50 members of the tribe band together and sued the government over the failed allotment program. They were called allotees. So it's the allotment program, just to give you the jargon, and then the members of the tribe are allotees, if you ever hear that term. And so they sue the government because they can't do anything productive with the land, and they lose. After that, this man, Lee Arenas, filed a suit of his own. Spoiler alert, he also lost. But in 1944, his appeal went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and he won. So hooray for him. The victory was short-lived, though, because it resulted in a court judgment that Arenas had to pay for his legal representation by selling his land. So again, this is just, it's just this terrible story, one time after the next of bureaucracy gone wrong. And so now this is the first time that the Bureau of Indian Affairs says, sure, you can sell the tribal land to private interest. Anyway, so his land was in Section 26. Again, notice that's an even-numbered parcel. And that's the parcel that's basically directly south of the 111 curve, right? The south end as we probably know it. And some of that land that he had to sell was purchased by the Alexander Construction Company and resulted in the development of the Twin Palms housing development. So this is the first mid-century modern desert collaboration between Palmer and Kreisel, the architects, and the Alexander Construction Company. And what's really interesting about that is that everyone from the architects to the Alexanders were Jewish. And so Twin Palms became one of the earliest developments without restrictive covenants and open for sale to Jewish buyers who were discouraged from buying in Palm Springs proper through basically de facto discrimination. Okay? So this is a really radical thing that happens. In 1951, the tribal chief, Albert Potencio, passes away. And a woman, Viola Ortner, at that time her last name was Olinger, so anyway, same person. She rose from her position on the tribal council to become chair. And she served in that capacity for 7 years. She was a remarkable woman. She immediately realized that the tribe would never be able to get the highest and best use for their land with a 5-year lease provision. So she started going to Congress and testifying in Congress to this effect. That's where she coined the "can't eat dirt" phrase, and was ultimately successful in getting Public Law 255 passed, which raised the ceiling lease from 5 to 25 years, and then there would be an option for 25 more years after that. Also, brilliantly, she engaged the architecture firm of Victor Gruen and Associates to develop a master plan for Section 14. And here is that master plan. So Gruen was a very successful firm in Los Angeles, very famous for his master planning exercises, and he was also credited with being the sort of father of the development of the modern shopping mall. So that was his first one was Southland Shopping Center in suburban Minneapolis, for those of you who might be Midwestern transplants. But that was the first air-conditioned shopping mall in the United States. Some people think that maybe that wasn't a good thing, but he did a lot more than that, and it's just how he's sort of often known, so I'm obligated to tell you that. So the Gruen plan was a wide range of development types. So this is the actual Gruen design for the Section 14 square. And if you look at it, you can see he's got hotels, golf courses, residential club areas. He's got single-family residences, apartments, a community center, a rec center, a convention center, and a tribal office, and, of course, a shopping center. It's a $100 million project, just to give you some idea. And Gruen's whole idea was that this should be undertaken by one developer so that it would be cohesive. He does these amazing renderings in the master plan, all the buildings were mid-century modern in their design. This is showing his rendering for the tribal offices. Here's a Gruen rendering for the proposed hotel. But unfortunately, the development of Section 14 required cooperation of several members of the tribe. And after decades, frankly, of discrimination and civil rights violations, many members were distrustful of the master plan idea, even though it was instituted by Viola Ortner. And basically by 1958, the Gruen master plan was pretty much dead. And it became really obvious to Viola also that even though she had raised the lease, the length of the lease terms to 25 years, that wasn't even enough for most developers to really make the investment that they needed to make, except for this guy. So she began negotiating with this guy, Sam Banawit. And Sam, I guess, was a man of vision, and he was the only guy who saw promise and would even tackle the 25-year, with the 25-year option lease negotiations. He decided to go ahead and build the Palm Springs Spa there. But just the lease itself, the negotiations of it, took 3 years and 11 lease drafts before the government would authorize the deal. So again, you can see at every step, the government, takes measures to keep this from happening. And so Banawit engaged Bill Cody, and he develops an 8.5-acre bathhouse and spa. It opens in January 1960. It draws national attention and a celebrity clientele, of course. And then the lease terms also established that the tribe would get 5% of gross receipts, 1% of food sales, and 5% of any subleases. And so this is the groundbreaking deal that paved the way for the tribe to become self-sufficient. But really, at first, nobody else would sort of take the risk like Banawit did. Down in Section 26, you can see that down there, something really interesting happened. There was a group of developers who could find a use for the 25-25 lease terms, if you will, and they chose to develop the first upscale trailer park. This is a thing that is unique to the desert communities. Trailer parks at that time pretty much had kind of a sketchy reputation that kind of went all the way back to people who had migrated in the 1930s and were kind of living out of their cars, and it was definitely not an upscale or glamorous thing at all. But Sahara was known as Sahara was known as the Jeweled Show, the Horizon Village Trailer Park, and Take's Canyon Trailer Park, which makes sense. And so why are these upscale trailer parks? Because specifically the developers brought planning, architecture, and amenities to this kind of development and living situation. And Viola was thrilled, but still she knew that, if she was really going to get developers to do any real development, she had to get past the 2025 lease term. But another thing happens, coincidentally. The tribe has another key to the development of Palm Springs, and that's the land under Sections 12 and Sections 18, which is where the airport was and is. And after World War II, the city purchased the land from the tribe to build the airport for $3 million. This is Parade Magazine, also found in the box. It's an unfortunate fold, I know, but still, nonetheless, this is Audrey Wellmus. She's one of the owners of that $3 million land, and I believe the title there is One of America's Millionaire Indians. And as you probably know, this paved the way for jet travel into Palm Springs, which also changed everything here, and also paved the way for Donald Wexler to design and build the beautiful Palm Springs Airport. So now we're down to checkerboard section 26. In 1959, President Dwight D. Eisenhower finally signs the Equalization Act and Long-Term Leasing Act, which extended a 99-year leasing provision to the Agua Caliente. And that's a game changer for the tribe. I cannot prove this just yet, but my suspicion is, Eisenhower spent so much time out here and he loved golf so much. He understood what this place was like, and he understood what the potential was here, not like the guy who drew the grid, who clearly, never even flew over the place. And so it took Eisenhower to have this understanding in order to sign this legislation. And again, of course, it's a game changer. They're still complex to negotiate, but it requires a lot of patience and cooperation between the tribal members. But here's what starts to happen. So here we are in the south end. This is section 26 looking south. You can see the rectangle with the arched trailers there is the Sahara Mobile Home Park, and Twin Palms just directly to the left of that. But now we're about to sign the first long-term tribal lease in American history, which was 440 acres in the $50 million Canyon Country Club on Section 26. So the developer here is Robert Grunt, a Jewish developer from New York, who negotiated a 70 years lease, and he had to negotiate with 25 different families with more than a year's negotiation, and the lease deal was 3 inches thick. So this is what enabled really the resort development, the planned use developments that are in the South End and for which the city and the region are known. So the success of Canyon Country Club drew other developers to the area. One of them was Roy Fay. He was of Ukrainian Jewish heritage, and he came to Palm Springs in the 1950s by way of Chicago. He was an early proponent of condominiums, and he jumped into development with tribal land. In 1961, he built Canyon View Estates, which was cooperative apartments on a 55-year lease, and he hired, once again, Palmer and Kreisel to design that. And then Fay is on record as actually saying that developing homes on Indian land was incredibly tricky because banks wouldn't loan on the land. And it took a series of basically well-connected Midwestern and East Coast developers, who were mostly kind of in the friend circle, if you will, for these developers, to make that investment. And they were all of Jewish descent. So Fay ended up doing more lease deals with the tribe than anyone else. He sort of became a master of it. So here's section 30. kind of see that there. We're building this out here. Section 30 is a very special section that is increasingly near and dear to my heart. All this golf course development now spills sort of north of Highway 101 into Section 30, into what is now Seven Lakes Country Club. Seven Lakes Country Club is the first master planned golf course condominium development in the Coachella Valley. It opened in '65, first with the golf course, which was master planned by Theodore Robinson, and he was a golf course architect, but also a planning architect who was educated at USC. One of the developers and golfers, Johnny Dawson, hired Richard Harrison, fresh from his partnership with Donald Wexler, to design the duplexes at Seven Lakes Country Club, and landscape architect David Hamilton to design the grounds. And so this kind of like long, low, horizontally massed duplex became an icon of modern architecture in the desert, and it remains one of the lowest density developments out here. They also engaged Bill Cody to design the Seven Lakes Clubhouse. And so all this is fueling the development of the South End. And what ends up happening is, even in those areas, in those sections which were not leased land, which were not owned by the tribe, it's now spawning the development of other, living options for similar projects. So here's Country Club Estates by A. Quincy Jones. His beautiful design for that development from 1965. Again, smaller here. This is low density, only 30 units in this development. And then after the success of Canyon Country Club, Bob Grunt returned to the South End to develop Kings Point condominiums, once again hiring Bill Kreisel. And Kings Point had its own golf course as well. So again, this could only happen because of these vast amounts of land, expanses of land that the tribe owned. Here's a fairway elevation from Kings Point. This is the B3 model, where the fairway elevation is kind of effectively the front elevation of these houses. And then in 1969, Roy Fay developed his own golf course on leased land in Canyon Estates. There you go. He built a 9-hole executive golf course and tennis courts, 11 swimming pools, and he worked with Charles Dubois in the early 1970s. So again, all of these guys are hiring basically the who's who of the Palm Springs School of Architecture, and they're creating some of the most avant-garde and amazing architecture that exists in Palm Springs. And again, this is another development where Jewish residents were allowed. So ultimately, Roy Fay's son, Bob Fay, took over the family business, and before Bob passed away, he used to go around town and give talks about Jewish history in Palm Springs. He's actually left us now as well, and I'm very grateful that his daughter was willing to share the text of some of those talks with me. Bob talked openly about the anti-Semitism that he and his father experienced in the desert communities. I mean, far back when you think of celebrities coming and staying in Palm Springs, it was abundantly clear that some hoteliers prevented guests who were Jewish from staying there. And even celebrities like Jack Benny were not permitted. And so there grew up Jewish-only hotels that were created by some owners to serve that aspect of the population. The actor Tony Curtis, who was born Bernie Schwartz, was not allowed to play tennis at the Palm Springs Tennis Club. And at one point, he and Janet Leigh toyed with the idea of creating their own development so that they would have a place to live and play tennis. And then, of course, Tamara's Country Club and the Racket Club were started because Jews are not allowed to play golf or tennis here, and that's what this place is all about. So, in conclusion, without, the vision of this amazing group of women tribal leaders, Palm Springs would have evolved into a very different mind. But for me, this story is bittersweet that after decades of civil rights violations and government-sanctioned delays, that this all-woman tribal council paved the way for Palm Springs to become the Palm Springs that we know of today. A hub of mid-century modern design by the Palm Springs School, a world-class golf destination, a demonstration project for upscale trailer parks, and a more diverse community. Thank you very much. So Joan was maybe going to come back and we'd take a few questions? Okay. Hopefully I can answer it. Oh, that's a really good question. I do not, I would speak with no confidence at all in terms of percentages. But what I can tell you is that Seven Lakes, about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago now, they negotiated with the tribe and purchased their land. So even though they had all been on tribal lease land, they bought it back. And so I know that I know from speaking with Bob Fay's daughter that, and I'm sure you've read it in the Desert Sun as well, but there's been this, very long drawn out process of renegotiating the leases, right? And that's all an individual thing with the individual owners. So I'm sure it's less than it used to be is the answer, but I can't answer a specific percentage. I would be making stuff up, and I'm a historian. I don't do that. So. Come on, somebody must have a question. Oh, there's one. Correct. Some did, yes, but usually these parcels, like I said, it's a mile square. So Canyon Country Club exists within one of the mile square parcels. I'm thinking of a slightly different situation, which is Cathedral Canyon Country Club, which is, as you know, like half of it's in Cathedral City and half of it's in Palm Springs. But I don't know which parcel, if it's on an even or an odd number parcel, or if that was a factor in that. But for the most part, they could build these large, golf course communities within these huge parcels. That's why it's so unusual. Yes? Do you think the tribe got a fair lease value for the land, or were they kind of taking advantage of it a little bit? That's hard for me to say. I don't know enough about finances at that time and maybe what market value was. The tribe did have representation by a judge whose name escapes me at this particular moment. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and have an excited utterance about that. And this judge seemed to be very earnest. In fact, it was his papers where I found all this magical information. He seemed to really have the tribes and the Alatee's interests at heart. But whether or not they were really getting full market value, that's unclear to me. I mean, like any development agreement, it's a push me, pull you of negotiation, right? So you don't want to discourage it because they were way better off having developers come in and develop the land. But if the price is too high, a developer's not going to buy it. So, yes. You still see some parcels around town that are just sitting empty. Do we assume that is land that is in the process of being developed, or is just they decided they don't want to sell it or lease it? If there was all of the above at the end of that list, that's what I would probably choose in that list. Yeah, I think it's very different for all of the different parcels of land. But you can see it's pretty easy even when you leave downtown Palm Springs. You can almost trip and tell where the grid starts and stops, right? Because it's not developed. And then now with the cultural center, that's of course on section 14, right? And you can see where that all plays itself out. So it's evolving still. Yes. So south goes below 111. If you know what I'm saying. And I'm relatively new to if I'm saying the wrong thing, I'm going to say below because that's south to me if I look at it on a map. How far east it goes? That is a good question. Let's see if we can answer that. How do I go back to the beginning? Let's just see if we can. Let's go back to one of the checkerboard. Oh, let's see if we can look at this. Come on. So 3 miles east of Cathedral City. Give or take a few hundred feet. Okay. Yes, way in the back. Yes. Well, I would just say that I can't travel back in time, and if we can do time travel, that'll be one of the places I will stop. I will also swing by the Palm Springs Planning Department and have them put architects on their building permits, but that's a different issue. And so Gruen was famous for modern architecture. That I can tell you. So the minute she picked Gruen for the master plan, he was famous for master planning exercises and for modernism. She was going to get modernism, so she must have known that. The tribe must have known that. Yes. Although you have to remember that Banawit was working with Cody, and all of the stuff that he was doing was also modern. So it's in the ether out here at the time, right? Yes. It's both. It's a both and. So yeah, and so there was some when they did the Ala-T process. Some of the land was owned collectively by the tribe, and some of the land was owned by this person over here and this person over here, and then maybe two kids, right? That were heirs to one of the tribal members. They would be owners, and so. That's why it was so complicated. That's why the leases were like 3 inches thick, because you had to negotiate with all these different families for, maybe this piece over here and then this little parcel over here and this parcel over here. So it wasn't like you just went and negotiated with one entity for the full mile square parcel. Everybody had to agree. So you can only imagine how that went. Yes. Yeah, I honestly can't tell you exactly what that is, but those are Southern Pacific owned parcels at originally. So it may be that somebody negotiated with them and then they did some kind of subdivision. I don't know the answer to that, but it's really easy, because the odd numbered parcels are the railroad owned ones, and then the even ones are always the tribal land. Yes. No, the government. Yes. Yes, and I believe it was like they were like an 1/8 acre. Don't quote me on this, but like an 1/8 acre parcel or something like that. Okay, and then you add up all the tribal members, and then, like I said, so and so is a tribal member, but then maybe he passes away, and now there are 2 kids, like we saw the little girl, right, for the airport. Those 2 kids now split that allotment. So as time goes by, and there's nothing but time going by, trust me, from like the 1850s until 1960, whatever it was, when Eisenhower finally did this, 59, I think it was 1960. It's like it's all just getting more and more and more fragmented as it starts going down through the generations. But it was the government that started that off, and then in their infinite wisdom, it all disintegrated into a really difficult system. Yes. Actually, it's not. I'm an architectural history. Yeah. There must be somebody here from the Palm Springs Historical Society. Any? Okay. Do you know the answer to that question? Okay. Got it. Okay. So then I guess they apparently sold off some of the other land just to Pearl McCallum and the people that we all know and all of that. So, but I'm not, that's not been my focus, you're right. But I in no way want to be representing myself as a tribal historian. I am an architectural historian. And that's why you guys should definitely go to the museum and the cultural center at the Agua Caliente, because they do an amazing job. They have an amazing interpretive program. So spend a morning or afternoon there. It's awesome. Yes, in the back with a hat. Not a lot, okay? Not a lot. Certainly like under 500, I think. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Perhaps you'd like to come up here with me. Where have you been all my life? I guess that's what I'm trying to... All right, well, thank you. Oh, here, well, last one. How about that? Okay. 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 But as I understand it, too, it's very difficult because some tribal members owned fertile land, if you will, and then other tribal members owned land that was not very fertile or didn't have access to water. And so just in and of itself, that sort of that abstract division at some level was really hard to negotiate for them. Okay, you're the last question. Yeah, oh yes, 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 no, it is an ongoing situation. Yes. Yes, unless like you're Seven Lakes and somebody's decided to buy out. And that was a really extraordinary thing that the administration of Seven Lakes chose to do. And as you can imagine, it was a hard sell to a lot of people who all had to agree to a special assessment to get that done, right? So thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming out today. Have a great rest of the afternoon.